I went to prison in 1967, right? And then was convicted in 1968. It was during the height of Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. Those were the speeches and those were the things that was being talked about.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now.
Good evening. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, 39 years old and a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and the leader of the nonviolent civil rights movement in the United States, was assassinated in Memphis tonight.
And the National Guard has been called back out in an effort to maintain law and order.
We have taken the following steps to restore law and order in our state, and you may be sure that the situation is under control and under constant vigilance of state and local authorities. We have proclaimed a state of emergency in Baltimore City and Baltimore County.
And I said, at that time, right, most of us, generally felt, okay, that there has been some significant changes taking place, right? Because when we moved to Baltimore City, still very, very segregated, right? You could go in department stores, but you couldn't use dressing rooms and things of that nature. And there was just certain areas that you couldn't go. It was simple as that. There was establishments that you couldn't go into at all. But that was then. And I said, when I went to prison, right, we were thinking in terms of, well, there have been some changes that were taking place, and we could see that if it continued on that path, that a significant amount of others would take place. I say, but I was released 40 years later, and I was released into what would be considered Dr. Martin Luther King's nightmare. Because instead of us being more closely connected, we seem to be more divided. And there are many things that has occurred over this period of time to cause these culture changes. I was gone the latter part of the 60s, all of the 70s, all of the 80s, all of the 90s, and half of the 2000s. So culturally, I missed what was directly or primarily responsible for these shifts.
We'll meet a man who spent 39 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. How did he finally win his freedom?
I didn't do it, and I'm never going to acknowledge or admit that I did.
The most important thing about my entire trial is that not one single police officer came to court to testify. And even the one that the judge had issued a subpoena because he was scheduled to come to testify never showed up, never testified. So here's a gentleman that's being tried for murder and robbery. The only people that testified was the people that was at the location and said that they saw the person. When I was initially released in 2006, when Judge Gail Raisin initially released me, unsupervised probation was suspended and I was completely free. Because the conviction remained on my record, that didn't allow, there was nothing available for me to, move forward. I couldn't even, at the time, they didn't even have the actual Innocence statute that was later created. I began going to Annapolis almost immediately, initially advocating to abolish the death penalty, because when I was tried and convicted, it was a death penalty case, and the death penalty was still in effect, even here in Maryland. And so I could have been sentenced to death. My advocacy in Annapolis to abolish the death penalty gave me an opportunity to meet with a lot of the senators and delegates and other advocacy groups too, for that matter, and interact with this person that has spent almost 40 years in prison. And over time, they began to inquire, well, have you been compensated yet? Or are they going to compensate you, et cetera, et cetera. And when I explained to them that the conviction still remained on my record, they were appalled. And they introduced the actual innocence statute and what the criteria was needed in order to prevail under it. And once that statute passed, that allowed me to go into the court. And in 2014, that's when I prevailed under the actual innocence statute, which cleared my record. With the court's decision today, I literally actually feel free after almost a half a century.
See, God had his arms around me, and I knew God had his arms around him. I know he didn't do it.
If I had never received a dime in compensation, I would have been fine, because not only did all the most important people in my life knew that I was innocent, and now most of the people that don't even know me know that I was innocent. So that was in and of itself enough for me. And the fact that we've been able to accomplish as much as we have over the years, I think we've made a pretty good statement.